Hey there, welcome back to my channel. First of all, accept my apology for the late release of episodes of this series. I was a bit busy with some other stuff that was interrupting the releasing plan. Now I am full capacity to continue the tutorials. Usually I'm recording in a weekend, so I will try my best to keep posting. Anyway, let's continue with our series. So in the previous episode, we have integrated Prisma and we have tested out how Prisma is interacting with the database, right? And we have seen how we are getting data back from the database as well as, right? So in this episode, we are going to work on our order service, right? So where we will be writing some kind of code, just like not in the same way we did for our catalog service. In the order service, we are going to follow functional programming, not in the class way, right? So where you can see maybe a couple of, or maybe a little bit different syntax, right? But nothing to worry, I'm gonna cover it up, right? And we are going to write some test cases as well as, and I will show you how we can handle the dependency injection as well as in the functional way, right? I'll be explain everything, how we can achieve all these things with the help of functional programming. And we are going to integrate the ORM as well as, but in this time, we are not going to integrate the same ORM, just like Prisma. We're going to integrate the result ORM, right? As I promised in our previous episodes, right? So there are a couple of milestones are there, but nothing to worry. We are going to cover all this milestone very quickly, right? So let's continue with the source code right now. So here, I'm gonna leave this diagram right here. So let's go to source code. Right, so here in the source code, let's go to order service. So I have already opened this workspace, right? So where we can see both the microservice together, right? So in the order service, let's go ahead here in the package.json file. As you can see, I have opened our workspace. So that's why we can see all the workspace directories right here. All the microservices are listed here. So I've just closed the catalog service. So let's go here and install the required libraries, just like we are going to add the Express. So this is not the case like every time we're going to use Express. We will be going to use some other frameworks as well as. So as an example, Postify or maybe Nest.js or something else. But this is not the topic of this tutorial. Maybe some other tutorial I'm gonna post all the stuff. Right, so let's try to install a couple of more libraries. So Express is fine. And we need the rate limiter also. Express rate limiter. And then we maybe need .env as well as. .env, and then what other things are needed. I think this is perfectly fine for a while, right? Let's try to add it. Okay, then a couple of more dev dependencies going to be needed, right? Then we can say add nodemon, and typescript as well as, ts node as well as, and yeah, we're going to write some test cases as well as, right? So let's try to add the Jest and ts Jest, right? Let's try to install a couple of types library as well as types, and this is going to Express, right? And Node, and I think these are all for a while, right? Perfect. So now we have installed all the required libraries. So if anything is going to be needed in future, we are going to add it accordingly, right? And first of all, what we are going to do, like let's try to initialize our tsconfig file, right? This is normal thing, this ts init, right? And then we are going to copy the same tsconfig configurations from here. So is there anything we did something new here? Not. Let's try to copy all those things from here and go over here and add it right there. So we are not going to spend to configuring the project because the project structure are going to be pretty much similar, just like catalog service. Only the source code, it will be different because we are going to write pretty much, everything we are going to write is a kind of functional way, right? So that is the thing we are going to do here in extra. All right, so we have our tsconfig file also here, right? So let's try to create a couple of directories here. So first of all, let's try to create the source directory, source C. Right, and after that we are going to create a couple of directories inside the source. All right, so I'm not a good fan of like the UI just creating like create new folder. So what I'm going to do, I'll be going to here, I'll be going to open this terminal and let's check it out. Yeah, let's switch it back to our source directory, right? Source directory. Now here, there's no any directories. So let's try to create all the directories, whatever directories are needed right here. So mkdir, let's give a name. First of all, config will be needed. Yeah, that's true. And then we're going to work on the DB also, DB repository, routes, service, types, utils, all these things are needed. Then I think this is fine. One more directory. This is going to be, let's say, models. We can just keep the models also, right? I think these are all good, right? So we have pretty much everything right here. Now, what are the things we need to go back here? We need to create one .env file also, right? So let's try to create touch.env file and env, right? .env file, right? The env file is created. Now what we're gonna do, we're going to write some codes, right? So let's go ahead here in .env. So here inside the .env file, you can add your application port. So just like we did from here, we have not added any port number, I think, right? So let's try to add it right there. So port will be 9003, let's say, right? So you can put any port number, that's up to you, but let's keep it like this way. Now what we're gonna do, this is perfectly fine. Now inside the source, we need to create a couple of more files, which is going to help us to spin our server, right? So here inside the source, let's see, right, source. So here inside the source, let's try to create two files. This is going to be touch server.ts and express.ts, right? So these are the two files are needed. So perfect. So these are the two files going to help us to spin our application, right? Here inside the server and the Express app, so we are not going to write all the codes line by line. I just wanna save some of your time. So this is pretty much similar, just like our catalog service, the Express app and server. So let's go ahead here in the catalog service server file, and let's borrow all this piece of code from here and right here, add it here. This is fine. And let's go to Express app. Let's grab all this piece of code from here and edit right here, right? So here's the thing, like, and we are going to change all these things apart from our requirement from our order service, but the basic structure is pretty much same. So let's try to rectify this Express app from here. Okay, so what I'm gonna do, let's try to remove this one, right? And this is, we can just simply say like this way. Okay, so now I think it is complying, right? So let's try to close rest of all, close order. Okay, so here in the server, let's try to put just like this. Express app. Perfect. So now I think this is working, and this is going to be 9000, let's say 9000. So now I'm gonna close this catalog service, so at least we can have enough room right here to write the codes, right? Cool. Now what we're gonna do, let's try to go ahead here, because server it's perfectly fine. So we can spin the server, but we need to add some code right here in Express app, right? So where we are going to hook up our routes and our repository, service, types, etc. Right? Perfect. So here in the Express app, let's try to add a couple of more codes. So first of all, let's try to implement a course, because that is going to be needed for us. Import course from course. Okay, I think we need to install this library, right? So let's try to add, let's go back to the root directory, right, in order service. So yarn add course, right? Yeah. Cool. So now we have our course here, right? And let's try to utilize here, because we are going to make a couple of calls from our local host. So that's why this is necessary. So app.use, right? Course. That's cool. Right. So here in the Express app, as you can see, we don't have any routes, right? So this is the routes, which is where we can use maybe for health check. So let's try to add a couple of parameters here. This is going to be request from our Express, yeah, request and response. Response from our Express, right? Then we are again just gonna say like underscore. This is going to be our next function. This is not required, but in this case we are not going to utilize. That's why we are gonna say like underscore, right? So now let's try to return something from here. Return res.status. This is going to be 200, right? Then we are going to say session, and we will say message health is up, right? Or maybe I'm healthy, let's say. Right, so this is just kind of like to satisfying the routes, right? So this specific endpoint. So when we are going to run your server, then when we are going to hit the root URL, then at least we are getting something from here, right? So this is always good practice to keep it up like this way. So at any point of time while you are going to deploy this application in the cloud environment, then you can utilize this one as a kind of health check API, okay? Or you can put a kind of like this way also, health also, right? It depends like how you are going to follow the health check endpoints. But let's try to spin the application. But before that, we need to add one script right here. Go to package.json here, and let's try to add dev here and dev, and we are going to say nodemon src and server.ts. Right, so this is the file which is going to spin our server, right? And if you go here, then it is by default it's going to spin in port 9000, and if you go to .env, this is the same port, right? Cool. So yarn dev, right? So it is spinning, right? This is spinning. So let's try to create one HTTP file here. We're gonna say request.http, right? And here we will be saying like it is going to get method and HTTP localhost. This is going to 9000, right? Perfect. Let's send a request from here. Now can you see it is saying like 200, okay? And I'm healthy, perfect. So our server is spinning correctly. So now let's try to close the server, and we are going to create a couple of files in the routes. So at least we can handle our endpoints, right? Routes, whatever the routes we are going to use for our order service. So let's try to close this catalog service from here and go to routes and create a new file. This is going to be order.routes.ts, right? So this is the routes where we are going to add all the order routes. And one more file we are gonna use, that is called the cart.routes.ts. So this naming convention, it depends on how your team is agreed on to keep the naming convention of the files. But usually while we are keeping our files like this way, you know, then it can be identical. Like this is a card, what kind of card it is, like what kind of file it is. So it's a routes, right? It's a service, let's say order.service.ts or order.repository.ts, something like that way. So this is a kind of naming convention. So you can keep like underscore also, or maybe dash also. It's up to you. Or maybe you can keep like camel case also, right? This is up to you. But in our case, let's try to follow this convention, right? So here in the diagram, let's try to understand what we are going to do with our order service. So let's try to add a couple of things right here. So this is our right? And this is our product. Then here this is our product. For example, let's say then we will our card, right? And have price. Price, right? Have a price, right? So let's try this one. And also, and this one's here, and this one's here, and this one's here. Right. And this is we're gonna keep our order service. This is good order, and this is order. Alright. Okay, cool. Now this is alright. Okay. So here the anything our process will be here. So this is else. Okay. Plug in. Right. So this is my system, right? Alright. So now let's move this. Right. Then let's go do this. Right. And then I don't need to let me try to right here. So this is like this. Right. So this is right. Maybe this right. Okay. So alright. So let's try to understand this diagram. What is going on right here, right? So first of all, our user will come to our product catalog where user can select the product, right? It can be any product, as an example, smartphone, and user can add that specific product to the cart, all right? As an example, you can say add to cart, right? And once that specific item is added to the cart, right? And we are gonna store the cart items as a kind of this specific product. Some of the informations we are gonna store right here in the cart items, not all of them, right? As an example, the product title, or maybe price, or maybe quantity, or some of the informations only, right? Then once this card is right there, then we will be initiating the payment, all right? So this collect payment is not a part of the order service work. So it's gonna handled by another microservice as an example. Then once we are collecting the payment, right? And right after successful collection of the payment, then we will be trigger this order create order endpoint to this the order microservice, right? Then what will be going to happen? The card items, all the card items, it is going to convert to the order, right? So move all these card item informations to order, right? So instead of this card, it will be order, and instead of the card items, it will be order items. So potentially the card items or card will be going to empty, right? So these are the two operations we are going to handle in the order microservice, right? So now I think we are pretty clear, right? So let's go back to the code. So here in the card routes, let's try to add some code, right? So first of all, we need express, right? Express from express. Then let's try to create a router. Router will be express.route. Yeah, express.router. And now let's try to export this one. Export default. Export default. Router, all right? So here we are going to add all the endpoints. As an example, router. So here we'll say card, then request. Perfect. So here let's try to return something just to satisfy this endpoint, right? So this is our first endpoint, and second endpoint let's try to add, because we want, if we are creating the card, then we need to get the card as well, right? So let's say get card. Then third one, we need to delete the card also, or maybe edit the card also, right? Pets, the card, and the last one, delete the card, right? Perfect. So now we have all the endpoints, right? Some of the more endpoints going to be needed, but as soon as we are going to add some code, then we are gonna tweak all these things, right? As an example, let's try to add one item from the card. So in that case, how we can handle. So those are the things we are gonna add, right? But as of now, let's try to go with this flow. So let's try to copy all these things from here, and let's go to our order routes, right? Let's try to add it here, right? So instead of this card, we're going to replace everything with the order, right? So let's try to find and replace with order, right? So let's replace all. Perfect. So now we have all the endpoints for order as well as, right? But a couple of more endpoints will be needed right here. As an example, order by ID, get order by ID. All right. So pets is not required. So let's try to keep the delete only, right? And here also we need the ID, order ID, right? So these are the routes we are going to handle for our orders, right? So let's go to the Express app and let's try to hook up all these endpoints, right? So first of all, let's try to import order routes from routes, then order routes, right? Then similar thing we are going to do for our card also. Import card routes from routes.card routes, right? So let's try to keep it up. Okay, cool. Now let's try to use all the routes here in the app.use. Use will be our card routes, right? Then app.use. Here will be our order routes, right? Perfect. So now we have our card and the order endpoints. So, but right before calling these endpoints, we will be adding a couple of more configurations, but not right now. So those are the configurations exactly it's going to be needed because this order service is public facing microservice. At any point of time, if this order microservice is not working, or maybe some of the endpoints are not working, at least we can get to know what is the root cause and we can fix it out to make it live again. Okay, perfect. So now we are going to spin the server and we will check it out whether we are able to reach out to these endpoints or not, right? So let's try to spin the server here on dev. Let's go to this http request.http file, and right after this we can put card and hit the send request. Now you can see it is able to reach, all right? It is saying the create card, though the message is not correct, but still we are able to reach the endpoint. Now let's try to change to order, then send a request. Now you can see like we are perfectly able to reach to the order endpoint as well as. Perfect. So now here in these endpoints, you can see we have our routes, but we don't have our service, our repository, etc. Right? So let's try to add all those stuff, right? So here inside this service file, we're going to create one file. This is going to be our card card.service.ts. Right. The similar way we are going to create one more. This is going to be order.service.ts. And the repository also we are going to create two more files. This is going to be our car.repository.ts. Right? And one more. This is going to be our order.ts. Perfect. So these are the files are perfectly fine, right? So here in the card service, you can see all the routes. We have the create card, get card, or edit card, or delete card. All these endpoints, all these function exactly, it has to be exist in the service as well as. Here in the card service, let's try to add all these functions one by one, right? And so I'm going to access right? Then closing like right? And here can say this is from. So let's try to get this is our and then editor, and Perfect. So now we can see here in the card service, we have 4 different functions, which is going to handle all the operations from our card router, right? So here, while we are going to call these routes, then we are going to simply pass all these things, all this responsibility to our service, right? So let's try to implement this service right here. In that case, let's try to implement our service, import store as service from, we will be going to access the service here in the card service, right? Perfect. So now here we have created our service, right? All the functions we have imported, right, as a service. So let's try to implement that. So here in this case, as an example, const response will be await. This is going to be service. This is going to be service the create card, right? And here we are going to pass to the request dot body, let's say body. Perfect. So and this response we can purely pass it back from here, right? So this is the same thing we're gonna do for our rest of all also, like get card also, right? This is going to be get card, get card, and this is the same thing we are going to do for our edit card as well as. This is going to be edit card, and for delete card as well as. Delete card. Perfect. So now our service is hooked up correctly, right? And this is the similar thing we can do with the order also. But let's try to finish the card flow first, right? Then we are going to jump into the order one. Then right now you can see we can fairly able to reach to our service, right? So while we're going to call this endpoint, then definitely our service will be responsible to create the card. But how we can create this card, right? Perfect. So now here in the card service, you can see we have all the functions, right? So while we are going to create all the functions, as an example, while we are going to create the card, then it has to perform some kind of database operation, right? So now the question is how we can inject the dependency in the functional way, right? In the functional programming also we can inject the dependency, right? So how we can do that? So let's try to do that, right? So here in the card repository, what we are going to do right before creating the card repository, let's try to create a couple of types, right? Here inside the types directory, let's try to create one type that is called repository type.ts, right? So here in the repository type, let's try to add some code. First of all, let's create a type create. This is going to be like kind of input will be any. As of now, we are going with the any, and later stage we are going to edit that specific type to some kind of input, and then we are going to say promise will be some kind of like maybe we can just keep a kind of empty object right here, right? Later stage, this empty object we are going to fill it up with our model, right? Where we are going to create some kind of model, right? Now this is our create function, and similar way we are going to create rest of all. This is going to be our find, and this will be our update, and this will be our delete, right? So instead of this input, maybe we can replace something else. But as of now, these are perfectly fine. So let's try to create one more type here, right? This is going to be export type. This will be our card repository type, and here we are going to assign all the functions, right? So first one is like create function type, and then second one will be our find a function type. Then we are going to say update. This is going to be our update function type, and last one will be our delete, right? So maybe we are going to add a couple of more functions right here in the repository types, right? The function types. That is, we can take care, but as of now, let's try to go with this, right? Create, find, update, and delete, right? Now our type is ready, right? So now let's go to here in the card repository. Let's try to create a kind of repository here. All right, so here in the card repository, let's try to add some code, right? Export const. This is going to be our card repository, and this will be our card repository type, right? So here we need to assign all the required functions. So what it is saying like we need to fix this one by implementing all these methods, just like create, find, update, delete, right? So let's try to add the missing properties, right? Perfect. So can you see now all the functions are implemented here, right? But we cannot keep all the functions inside here. So maybe we can move all the functions to keep it outside, so at least we can have a kind of clean code, right? So let's try to do that. So in this case, let's say const create a card. Create card will be async, right? And it will be having input as a property, input any, right? And it will return some kind of promise, right? And promise will be any kind of promise, right? Then we will decide like what are the things we are going to return from here. So as of now, let's try to resolve it. Return promise dot resolve, right? Let's try to pass kind of empty object here. So at least this is going to be satisfied. The similar thing we are going to do for our find, update, and delete, right? So then what we are going to do, we are going to simply assign this one. It's like create card, right? Then this is going to be our update card, then find card. Let's try to move this one so a little bit up right here. And this will be going to be our delete card, right? So let's try to assign all those things right here. Find card, and this will be our update card. This will be going to be our delete card. Perfect. So now it looks cleaner, right? So here we are just constructing our repository by providing all these functions. So at least here we can write our codes, right? Right now you can see it is more cleaner, right? So we have all this assignment right here, and all the declaration we are just keeping up here, right? And here, while we are just creating our card, then we can connect to database, connect to DB, and perform DB operations. And we can just return the data back. This is the way it's gonna work. Perfect. So now it seems like our card repository is ready here, right? So let's try to hook up this this card repository with our service, right? Let's go to card service here, and you can see here, and while we are creating card, we are receiving the input, but here there is no any connections between the repository, right? So what we are going to do in the second parameter, we are going to accept right here as a kind of repo will be our repository type, right? This is going to be our card repository type, right? And this is the similar thing is going to happen for all the other functions as well as. Perfect. So now let's try to do one thing, create card, this message exactly. We're going to return something const, let's say data will be await the repo, right? Repo.create, right? Here we are simply going to pass this input, right? So, and whatever the data we are getting it from our create function from repository, that is we are simply going to pass it here, right? That is perfectly fine. And a similar thing we are going to do from here as well as all the functions, right? And here as well as, and here as well as. So we'll be making all these changes from there. And this is going to be get card or find, right? Fine. And this is going to be our update. And this is going to be our delete, right? So I think let's go here. Yeah, delete. So delete is going to be like this, right? So now this one also we need to do like this. Okay. Now let's go to our service. Now I think, yeah, delete is complying correctly. So while we are going to create the card, then somehow we need to pass this one out as well as, right? So how we can inject this dependency from outside. So if you go to the routes right here, you can see we are creating the service here, right? But we don't have a kind of repository here. So let's try to create a repository. So const repo will be, so let's try to import the repository, import *as repository from, yeah, here, go to repository. And you can see like we have our card repository. So now this card repository is exactly, you can see here, this card repository also, repository, the card repository, right? This repository is a type of card repository type, right? So this is what exactly we need here, right? So let's go ahead and edit this one. This repo, we are going to pass it right here. While we are going to create the card, the second parameter will be our repository. And you can see the error has gone, right? So because this create card exactly is needed a kind of card repository type. And if you go to card repository here, all right, if you go here in the card repository, you can see this card repository exactly is complying with the card repository type, right? So that means all this create and find, update, delete, all the functions are complying with the types also, right? This is what we have added here, right? So if you go here in the routes and if you need to test it out, then at any point of time, you can come back and you can assign some kind of the mock repository, right? Where you can add, instead of this actual implementation, you can, the database implementation, you can use some kind of mock implementation as well as. So which is going to help you to make it whole solution is going to be testable, right? So this is what we are going to accept like this way. So right now you can see we have a proper dependency right here and we are injecting that dependencies to while we are calling that function, right? So in the functional approach, in the functional way, we can achieve the dependency injection like this only, right? So now you can see here, while we are just creating our card, then we are simply injecting our repository from here, right? And the service, exactly, it is just like while we are accessing the create card, right? Then the first parameter is the input and second parameter is our repository. And a similar way, let's go ahead and implement for rest of all repo, right? And third one also, we are going to implement just like repo, right? And fourth also, that's repo, right? Perfect. So now we have all the functions are hooked up with our repository correctly. Now, if you go to the flow right here from the create card, let's say go to create card and go to the create repository. Let's try to return something from here, right? So if you go to repository and let's try to return, like while we are going to create our card, at least it has to return some data. So here we'll be saying like message page response from card repository, right? So while we are going to call this create card, then we will return these things like the SMSs, kind of like the peg repository, and eventually you can return this input also, just for testing purpose only. While we are going to call this one, at least it has to return something, right? So maybe we can keep it just like this, right? In the ES6 way. Perfect. So now go to routes here and try to spin the application, and we are going to hit this post route of the card. Then we should supposed to see the whatever the input we are sending it right there, and it should have to return the data exactly from the repository, right? Let's go ahead and spin the application here on dev. Perfect. So now let's go to let's close everything from here, close all, and go to our HTTP request.http file. Here, this is not going to be get anymore. Let's say post So here, this is our card, and here, contact will be a session. And here we can have a like item will be, let's say, $1,200, right? So this is the item we are going to pass it on, right? So this is a kind of post call. So once we are calling this one, it has to respond something from our repository. So can you see it is giving back 200, all right? And you can see the peg response is coming from our card repository. So that means our whole pipeline it's purely connected, right? So now this is perfectly fine, but how we can test it out? That is the most essential question right here, right? Let's write some kind of test here for our card service, all right? So I'm going to create a file here. This is going to be our card.service.test.ts. Right, so here we are going to write some tests, right? To write some test cases here in the card service.test file. So let's try to make sure like we have properly installed our Jest, right? So once again, I'm going to install Jest, add Jest. So make sure like you have installed Jest, TS Jest, and the types Jest as well as in the as a development dependency. All these things are going to be development dependencies, right? So let's try to add it, right? Perfect, so it's added. Now yarn Jest init. We need to initialize our Jest here, right here inside this order service. And it is asking a couple of questions. So let's try to follow that questions and answer it properly. So it is asking like whether we need to add, whether we can add this test in the package.json file or not. So I'm gonna say yes, right? Then it is saying like, would you like to use the TypeScript for the configuration file? Then I'm gonna say yes. Then yes, absolutely. Yes, absolutely. We are going to use in Node. And yeah, test coverage also we can say yes, right? Because in future we are going to add the code coverage also. Yes, we are going to use the V8 engine. That's perfectly fine. And it says like automatically clear mock calls instant. Yeah, this is also yes. Perfect. So now we have initialized our Jest, right? But here a couple of things we need to do, right? So while we are going to run the test cases, then it will going to give some error because we need to exclude our node modules. So what we are going to do, let's go to here in the catalog service and copy the Jest configuration from there, right? We are not going to do once again, copy everything from there because the project structure is pretty much similar, right? And add the Jest config right here as well as. Perfect. So now it is added there. Now if you can go here in the package.json file, then you can see it is automatically added this test script right here, right? Where you can directly run the test cases, right? So let's try to run the test, yarn test. Then you can see it is failing, right? So we don't have any test cases. That's why it is failing. So let's go ahead and write some kind of test cases here. So first of all, let's describe, and here we say and we'll see here. Then here inside this describe, we're going to add a couple of tags. This is going to be first before each, right? And where we will be adding our repository, right? So let's try to create our repository here. Let repo will be our card repository type. Yeah, this is going to be fine. And here we are going to initialize our repository. Repo will be our repository. Let's try to import our repository from here. Import star as repository from a repository, and this is going to be our card repository, right? Then here we can say repository.card repository, right? So every time while we are running the test cases, right before each test cases, we are going to assign this card repository to repo. So right, so this is the thing. And second thing, what we can do after each, let's say after each repo we can set it null. Right, so we can set it null, or maybe we can put it undefined, or maybe we can just like do like this. Repo will be empty object as card repository type. This is also going to be fine. So that means it will going to allocate this one, and after that it is going to remove everything, right? So this is the way we can assign the repository. Now what we are going to do, we are going to write some test cases, right? So at least one of them, so at least I can show you how we can test it out our card service. Then maybe we can move forward of the writing all the actual codes for card repository and card service. along with the routes also, right? So the first thing it will be like it and we are going to say this is going to be like a synchronous call, and here inside this code we can just create some kind of mock data as well as, right? Then what we are going to do, like we are going to accept the response from our await. So here also we need to import our create order, right? So let's try to import from let's go back to service, here to service, and we are going to import our card service. Let's try to import create card, right? So this is the function we are going to utilize right here, await create card, and here we are going to pass our mock card. This is mock card, and second parameter will be our repository, right? So this repository that is we have created right here, this one, we're going to pass it here, right? Now this is perfectly fine. Now what we are going to expect here, we can say some kind of object right here. So as of now we don't have any clue, but still what we can say, this mock card item has to be returned as a kind of response, right? And message also, it has to become something like this, right? This similar message whatever we are going to return from our repository. So let's go to the card repository. We can say this message will become from something like this, right? And as a kind of input, we are going to return the same data, right? So let's try to expect like this, right? And the input will be our this mock card, right? So this is the thing we are going to expect from there, right? So now let's try to run the test, right? So run test. So can you see it is getting passed, right? So why exactly it is getting passed? Because we have our repository, we are getting called from there, right? But can you see, like we have just created our repository, it is directly calling that the actual functionality, right? So if I'm going to change something like, let's try to remove this message from there. Let's say this is going to be tweaking a little bit. So I'm intentionally going to fail the test case here. So it is failing right here. So it is failing, you can see, right? So this message exactly, it is, though it is expecting from the database, it is hitting our actual database, right? That is what we don't want, right? So what we can do right here, let's revert it back. So right before calling this function, we are going to mock our repository from there, right? This, while we are going to call that the create function of the repository, right? So this create function, then it has to result some kind of response from there, right? Because we, every time while we are going to run the test cases, we don't want to insert any kind of data in the database, right? So let's try to do that. So how we can do that? With the help of Jest, we can do that. Jest.spy on, and we are going to say repository, right? Repository dot the card repository. Then we will say, while we are going to call the create function right here, then let's try to mock implementation once. So now here inside this mock implementation, let's try to resolve this one, right? So this is going to be our promise dot resolve. And what we are going to resolve right here, the first thing we are going to put a kind of message right here, this one, and second one will be our mock card. This is going to be some kind of input, something like this, right? So this is the same object, we can just keep it right here, right? What it is doing right here. So while we are going to call this create card, then this create card function is going to call our create function. And while we are going to create this one, then it is going to, instead of this returning this actual item from the database, right? So it is going to be return some kind of result or some kind of response from here, right? So whatever the data we are going to pass it on, this is the same thing we are going to receive right here, right? So let's try to run the application here, right? Now you can see it is getting passed, right? So this is the way we can just test it out our service. And other way around, while it comes to test the repository also, you can also test the repository in a similar way. So what we can do, instead of calling this DB, as an example, we can have a DB object, const, let's say DB, right? So this is a kind of functionality, or maybe a kind of function, which is we are going to call right here in DB. Let's say here we are going to call DB connect, let's say like this way. Then while we are going to test this one, this create function of our repository, then simply we can spy on this DB function right there, or maybe we can mock that DB function and we can simply test this create a card functionality as well as. So those are the test cases we are going to write very soon. But first of all, we need to write some actual functionality. So now I hope you understood like how we have just created our server here, and we have created our Express app, and we have created our routes right here, and we have hooked up our repository and the service right in the functional way, where we have passed our dependency to our particular function right here, right? Now you can see there are no any class involved, but still it is working as expected and it is still testable, right? So in the next episode, we are going to write a couple of more codes, but right before that, we need to integrate our ORM, because right now you can see we are accepting input as a kind of any. So this is not a kind of good practice at all. So here, what we are going to do, we're going to use some kind of DTO, and while we are going to dealing with our repository here in the card repository, then we will be going to implement our ORM. As I said in the beginning of this tutorial, we are going to implement Drizzle. So in the next episode, we are going to integrate Drizzle, then we are going to continue all this functionality. Right. Perfect. Then I hope you have enjoyed this video tutorial, and I will see you in another episode. Bye-bye.